All right. Chapter 20. Isabel Derby. In spite of Teeny's diminutive size, Amari noticed that no one ever questioned her authority in the kitchen, not even the white people who lived in the main house. For a slave, that was power. Isabel Derby, the current mistress of the house, turned out to be surprisingly motherly and caring. Amari had heard whispers and rumors about her from some of the house slaves who stopped by Teeny's kitchen. Her husband controlled her every move and kept her away from everyone she had once known, they said. Amari noticed also that the household servants obeyed her without question. Maybe because she was the only white person they knew who looked at them with a smile. All the slaves who whispered about the fact that she was pregnant also whispered about the fact she was pregnant. Excuse me. Each morning, Mrs. Derby, dressed in white, as she usually was, came to Teeny's kitchen, greeted everyone with a cheerful hello, and planned the meals for the day. She would sometimes unlock the smokehouse so Teeny could choose a smoked meat if nothing fresh was available. Amari knew that Teeny would fix what she wanted to in spite of what Mrs. Derby suggested, but they had this conversation every morning anyway. "It's a lovely day, Teeny," she'd always begin. She would always glance out of the narrow door and toward the horizon as she said that. It seemed to Amari that she wished she could be in another place. "Yes'm, gonna be hot again, hotter than buzzard's breath." A look of wistful sorrow crossed Mrs. Derby's face. Perhaps some iced tea for Master Derby at dinner would be refreshing." Mrs. Derby always frowned as she spoke of her husband. "Yes'm, I'll be fixing fresh chicken and snow peas and hush puppies. Anything else you be wanting today?" Maybe some of your delicious peach pie?" "Already done started, ma'am. Be real good for you and that child you can. You need a little meat on them bones." Mrs. Derby looked down at her swollen belly. "I'll pray for this child, Teeny," she said quietly. Mari watched as the woman gently rubbed her stomach. Yes'm, maybe that child make you happy for sure." "Perhaps," Mrs. Derby replied, the wistful look returning. Amari was fascinated with this white woman, who seemed to be so pleasant and gentle. She tried to be in the kitchen area whenever Mrs. Derby came around, because the mistress of the house had a kind word for everyone and always smelled like flowers. Amari liked the fact that she didn't look at her as if she were ugly or an animal or a piece of flesh to be used. Mrs. Derby smiled at her with genuine compassion. One early morning, when the grass was still wet with dew, Amari was returning to the kitchen with a bucket of water for Teeny. She didn't often get time alone, so she walked slowly, savoring every solitary moment, even though she knew Teeny would scold her for being late. She looked up with surprise as she almost collided with Mrs. Derby, who was walking along on the path that led to the woods. Dressed in a long, billowing gown that insinuated her pregnancy, and a white hooded shawl, she looked almost like a spirit to Amari. Insinuated just means that it's making her pregnant, making her really look pregnant. "You are Mina, am I correct?" Mrs. Derby asked her, to Amari's surprise. Her voice sounded whispered. Nervously, Amari replied, "Yes'm." She stared down at her own bare, dirty feet, which stood so close to the fancy white shoes of the mistress. Teeny had told her never to look the masters directly in their eyes, but Amari had stolen looks at Mrs. Derby as often as she had been able to. "Are you adjusted to your life here?" the woman asked kindly. Again, Amari simply replied, "Yes'm." How could she tell this woman of the horrors of her forced nights with Clay, or her gut-wrenching longing for her mother? "It must be very difficult for you, dear," Mrs. Derby said, as if she had read Amari's mind. "I know what it is like to be unhappy." Surprised, Amari looked up. This white woman was admitting a weakness to her. A slave? Mrs. Derby smiled and reached out to touch Amari's shoulder. Amari, startled by her kind touch, gazed into eyes so green they looked unreal. She had never encountered anyone with eyes that color. Amari also knows that what might have been tears on Mrs. Derby's face, but perhaps it was just her imagination. Mrs. Derby hesitated, then said, I know about you and Clay." Amari stepped back, her heart pounding fast. What did she mean, you and Clay? Did this woman think she went to his room voluntarily? Amari didn't know what to say, didn't know how to say all the jumbled thoughts in her head. "It is an unfortunate situation," Mrs. Derby said with feeling, "but I have no control over what he does. To tell you the truth, I have very little power over anything around here," she said morosely. "I just want to let you know how I sympathize. I hope it ends soon." Amara, whose face was hot with embarrassment, managed to mumble, "Thank you, ma'am." "I must go now," Mrs. Derby said suddenly, looking nervously toward the manor house. She gave Amari one last look, then turned and hurried back to the house, her body a silhouette against the morning sun. Later that afternoon, Amari, peeling potatoes in the corner of the kitchen, listened as Lena, one of the house slaves, gossiped with Teeny, grasping onto every word. Amari did her best to figure out the conversation. And before we continue, um, most slave houses had what they called house slaves and field slaves. The field slaves stayed outside in the shacks on the plantation. That's where Amari and them stay. Sometimes they would like work in the kitchen or cook food, but they did it outside of the house. Then you had the house slaves who were the ones who served food, and they sometimes they dressed a little bit better. They would get a little few more privileges or perks, not many. Um, but that's what's going on. That's why they have the two different, not classes of slaves, but the two different classifications. All right. Miss Isabel be carrying that baby real high, Teeny. I figure it's a boy. Nah, girl, Teeny commented. It's a girl for sure. Miss Isabel deserves a pretty little girl to keep her company in that big old house. I feel sorry for her. How you feel sorry for a rich white woman? Lena asked harshly. Money ain't everything, child. And ain't none of this money belong to her. She got about as much chance to use his money as you do. Yeah, but she ain't no slave, Lena insisted. Yeah, pretty close to it, Teeny said. He decide where she go, who she talk to, where she wear, everything. She just sleep in a better bed than you do. Lena continued. And Noah, that slave she brought with her, I heard tell she got legal papers all read up for him. So when she die, he be free. Do say now, Tina replied. She didn't make no real comment. Lena had ambled out of the kitchen then to tend to other chores. Intrigued, Amari wanted to know more. How old she be, Miss Derby? Amari asked Teeny. Teeny counted on her fingers. Maybe around about 18. She's just a young thing. She came to that marriage with that her slave Noah. Lots of land, piles of money, which is what old Massa wanted. Teeny glanced at Amari, a look of warning on her face. Now don't you be minding white folks' business, you hear me, gal? Just get them potatoes peeled right quickly. Amari nodded and tried to focus on the mountain of potatoes in front of her. Several evenings later, just before darkness completely obscured the path, Amari, exhausted from the labors of the day, hurried to finish gathering kindling to stoke Teeny's fire during the night. Suddenly she stiffened, for just off the path she heard soft voices, a deep male voice speaking in hushed tones, then a female's whispered reply. The woman seemed to be upset or crying. Who there? Amari asked, not sure what she was interrupting. She recognized most of the slaves on the place by now, and knew they posed no threat to her, but she feared running into Clay. She heard a rustling in the bushes, then footsteps retreating. Amari listened for a moment or two, but all was silent, so she hurried back to Teeny's kitchen. She had learned in her short time on the plantation never to ask too many questions. Some things were best left unsaid, so she did not mention the incident to Teeny or Polly. At the end of each day, Amari collapsed, exhausted, on the floor mat in her small cabin. At first she thought she was being selfish, taking the sleeping mat from Polly, but Polly actually seemed to prefer that lumpy, smelly mattress. Gradually, Amari had figured out that not everyone slept as she had back in her village. So if you notice, there's a reason why she sleeps on the floor on the mat. That's how she slept back in her village. So she's not really a fan of the mattress. And remember, this is Polly is poor, and she lives out there close by the slaves. And those mattresses and stuff like that, they're not washed, and this is nasty and stinky. And remember, this is the time Edgar Allan Poe, well, right, actually about 100 years before Edgar Allan Poe. And remember before when we were talking about like some of the rodents and bugs and things of that nature that they had just in Poe's time, it was exactly the same, 100 years earlier, just a little bit, probably just a little bit worse. So keep that in mind. Um, Clay, for example, slept on a soft, clean feather mattress with perfumed sheets and silken curtains around the four-poster bed, but the curtains hid his vile habits. The smell of the perfume made her gag, and the clean sheets stank of his sweat by the time he was done with her. Oh, how she hated the smells of that bed. Mari didn't know how the other slaves managed, for after their day's labor, they returned to their huts to care for their children and tend their small gardens, and prepare their own meals for the next day. Sometimes she heard bits of their conversations and voices singing late to the midnight hours. Why do you think they sing? Polly whispered one hot, humid night as they listened to the somber songs drift through the window. Songs float up to sky, fly free, Amari had replied simply. She sadly thought back to the music of her mother's voice. She fell asleep, and thankfully on that night she was not awakened by Tidbit. All right, guys. So we finally got introduced to Mrs. Derby, who they've been talking about some of the earlier chapters. Her name is Isabel, and we see that she is totally different from the Derbys. Um, Even before the first Mrs. Derby, she seemed to be like a not a very nice person, which probably attracted her to Mr. Derby. She was mean to the slaves. She beat them. She had a sharp tongue. She was what you would call the classic. I really don't know. Almost like a shrew, you know what I mean? Like the classic shrew. We talked about that. More of the stereotypical Southern, um, stereotypical Southern Southern woman. Not even Belle, but the type that commanded the house, commanded the household. Very much like that. And so they were all. It seemed like they were all very bitter people. And Isabel's kind of the exact opposite of that. She's very nice, warm, welcoming to the slaves. They all kind of like her, as much as you can like somebody. So remember, when the slaves talk harshly about people, especially white people, they've only known, you know, white people to do bad to them, or not help them in their plight. Remember, this is slavery, and people even, this was an entire society that allowed slavery to continue. So they didn't really have too much sympathy. But they did have some, especially the situation she's in. She has to be around Mr. Derby, who is obviously not that nice a person. Seemed like he just married her for her money and status, which happens. Um, you guys see that sometimes in movies, or and I always reference Game of Thrones, but it happens in just stories like that where the man will marry the woman for her money or status to continue to keep his money or status up. That seems like what Mr. Derby did. Um, so we get a hint of intrigue. Something is going on with somebody on the plantation, whispering and talking to each other. We don't know what this is, so don't bug out and think that it is the Underground Railroad right away. I'm not even sure if Harriet Tubman was alive at this time. Somebody would have to Google that and see, but we don't know what was going on with that. So something's going on, but Amari's trying to stay away from it because that is just safer from her, like it would be for most slaves. And we basically kind of get a feel of some more of the structure of slavery within the Derby plantations. House slaves, they do come and go with and talk to the slaves who are out in the fields and doing more work. So keep that in mind. You guys will have some questions that you need to finish. That was chapter 20. So we are now finished with everything. You guys will have your questions, all your questions that you need to get done in your chapter. So if you haven't been doing them or you need to get caught up on them, go ahead and knock those out. When I get back on Tuesday, we will start part 4, which goes right back to Polly's perspective, that which will be chapter 21. And you guys have a great day and be good. Talk to you tomorrow, hopefully. Bye.